So I've been spending a lot of time recently thinking about the notion of transformative experience. And the way that I think about it is a little bit different maybe from the ordinary notion, so I'll get it going by giving you guys an example. Imagine that you had a one-time only chance to become a vampire. Okay? One shot, it's irreversible. All of your friends and family members have become vampires, okay? And all of them tell you that it's fabulous. Now, there's a catch. You don't want to be a bad person. You're still a person if you become a vampire. So we're going to pretend that these vampires are basically vegetarian vampires. They drink the blood of humanely farmed animals, not humans. Okay, that's the sense in which they're vegetarian. And all, as I said, your friends and family members have become vampires, so you wouldn't leave anyone behind. Sounds like it would be pretty great, right? You'd have immortal strength, speed, and power, amazing sense capacities. You'd look fabulous in black clothing. But, of course, you'd have to drink blood, animal blood, but blood nonetheless. You wouldn't be able to go out in the sun. A number of things would change. And so when you reflect on this possibility, you think about it a little bit more, and you ask your friends and family, well, should I do it? And they say, absolutely. You say, well, why should I do it? And they might say, well, look, in the case I'm thinking of, you can't really understand what it's like. You have to be a vampire to know what it's like to be a vampire. You're just human. You're limited. So just take it from me. Become a vampire, because I know you'll think it'll be great. Once you're a vampire, you'll understand. And the problem I have with that way of approaching the decision is that I think that there's no rational way that you could decide to become a vampire. There's also no rational way for you to decide that you don't want to become a vampire. That is, if you are thinking about whether or not to become a vampire based on what you think it's going to be like to be a vampire, based on the character of living your life as a vampire in the future, irreversibly, forever, you haven't got the information that you need. And so if you want to make a rational decision based on what it would be like to become a vampire, you don't have the information you need. You're only going to get that information if you become a vampire. But by then it's too late. You've already made an irreversible decision. Okay. So the way that I'm thinking about becoming a vampire in this case is that becoming a vampire would be a transformative experience. Transformative epistemically and transformative personally. And the fact that that both of these things come together is really important. By epistemically transformative, I mean the experience is of a kind such that you have to have an experience of that kind before you can know what it's like to have an experience of that kind. So it's dramatically new. And it's also personally transformative. That is, when you undergo it, your core personal preferences change. How you experience the world changes. The way that you think of yourself changes. So the thought is that the vampire choice is a choice that you're confronted with where you don't know what it's going to be like. It's major, irreversible, and life-changing. Seems like it could be fabulous, but it also seems like it could be really, really different from what you know now and who you are now. And it might be totally inconsistent with who you are now to actually become a vampire. Now, I say it's couldn't be a rational choice because if you can't know what it's going to be like, and that's what you care about, then you can't assign values to the outcomes, which means that you can't perform an expected utility calculation. You can't build a model that you're going to be able to use. In other words, you can't build a decision using a decision model in order to rationally kind of calculate the expected value, and so therefore you can't make the choice rationally under those circumstances. Maybe you could flip a coin, but that's a very different kind of situation to be in.
So I'm curious what you think this implies about religious conversions. Becoming a vampire is a certain kind of conversion experience, right? It's a choice to alter yourself physically in certain ways, but it's a choice to enter into a certain kind of culture. It's a choice to adopt a certain kind of lifestyle. It's a choice to allow your values to become shaped in all kinds of different ways. One difference between the religious conversion case and the becoming a vampire case is, you might, in considering converting to another religion, you might acquire certain kinds of beliefs, like there's a God, this God makes certain kinds of demands, and you might have the view that, morally speaking, maybe I ought to follow this God or something like that. But there's still going to be a whole lot to it that you can't predict in advance. You don't know what it's like to be fully shaped in the ways that the tradition will shape you, or in the ways that entering into that religious tradition will shape you. You don't know what it's like to be a person with the kind of values that you'll have at the end of that outcome. you don't even, I guess, know what you will think, rationally speaking, about the belief set, after you've immersed yourself into theology for years and years and years. So, I mean, is it your view that religious conversions are non-rational episodes, or is there a disanalogy here?
I think there are some disanalogies, but I think the strong analogy, and I have this example about becoming a vampire, but I think a lot of major life transitions basically have exactly this structure. And religious conversion, whether you're becoming religious or whether you're losing your belief, I think can count as that kind of transformation. Let me describe the analogies, because where I think the strongest analogy involves the notion of identity change, like self-identity change, that's involved in the massive epistemic move that is being made. So first, you're changing a lot of your basic beliefs and basic personal preferences. It seems to me that if you are adopting a belief, that experience is going to basically infuse the character of your lived existence, of your lived experience and the way that you exist. And the way that you experience your own mind is going to change. And so if that's right, then there is an epistemic parallel, namely the epistemically transformative dimension of the transformation is also really important. It's not just a personal change, but rather you're going to learn a new way to experience how your mind basically is related to God's mind, presumably on mini mainstream. And so that's a deep structural parallel with the choice to become a vampire. Now the question about rationality, I think, comes up slightly differently, because I don't think that these kinds of religious transformations are best thought of as, under the rational choice model. Mm-hmm. But I do think it can be a rational choice or not a rational choice. In other words, I think the question can come up when you're considering whether or not you want to open your mind to the possibility. So once you open your mind, it seems to me, and allow your mind to form itself in new ways, assuming that that involves opening your mind, let's say, to awareness of God, then it does seem to me that you're drawn in, okay? So that it's like once you start to become a vampire, once the blood is getting sucked out of your neck, that's you choose to allow the vampire to bite your neck. That's like choosing to either allow yourself to be open to a new way of thinking about the world, whether that's open to a belief or also open to skepticism. I really think it's parallel. I don't think it's just about becoming a believer. I think it also can be, as I said, losing your faith, right? And so there, it might be that you can't actually make a rational choice to go one way or the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think like a lot of people seem to think that religious conversions, you hear this a lot more about people losing faith, but I think it can apply to gaining religious faith too. A lot of people seem to think of it more as something that just happens to you, mm-hmm. but is nevertheless subject to rational evaluation. On the one hand, there is this really strong parallel, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I guess in some context, becoming a vampire is something that happens to you too. But I'm wondering how you bring these two things together. Can
I actually kind of try to sharpen the disanalogy?
Yeah.
Along the lines of what you're talking about, it's to say that what strikes me as perhaps disanalogous is the voluntary dimension. And so when you talk about, Mike, about the idea of just having people who convert or abandon their mm-hmm. religious identities do so because they tend to describe it as ratifying something that's already taken place or it has already been well underway. That is to say, I just found myself a Catholic, and so I just, when I made the decision to start mm-hmm. blah, blah, then I just basically had already happened, and I never consciously said, I'm going to open myself to do this, or I'm going to so on. Whereas being the vampire case,
you have an explicit choice.
Like,
that's
it's
right.
like red pill, blue pill kind of thing.
So that's why I wouldn't originally think of the analogy in terms of rational choosing or non-rational choosing, but rather the interesting analogy involves the notions of transformation here. So there's the rationality question, and then there's identifying the structure of the transformations and the importance of that. And so I've heard, people say, people often, they just find themselves becoming Catholic or Jewish or whatever faith that they adopt. But there's also a skeptical view where someone says, look, I'm not going to allow myself mm-hmm. to be drawn in And they really view it as a drawing in. Now, I actually don't think that that's something that involves rationality, but I do think it involves a certain kind of attitude towards basically the possible of radical personal transformation under radical epistemic change. Some people are afraid of that kind of change, and there might be a rational basis in it, not about choosing to believe or choosing not to believe, but being rationally afraid of losing touch with your current self, or being rationally open to becoming a new self. So I just think the dimension of rationality isn't going to map onto the choice to believe in the same way.
Although, so what Samir said and then what you said at the beginning sort of helps me to clarify the question I was struggling to ask. So here I think is a standard kind of loss of faith story. Someone grows up and say they grew up in the Christian tradition, right? Sometime, in college, right? They find that they're losing the beliefs that go along with Christianity. They're maintaining the practice, and in some cases they're hanging on to it, right? Because it's part of their identity. A fairly standard narrative about this kind of process says, look, your beliefs are just moved by the evidence, right? And then being an authentic person is just a matter of living a lifestyle in accord with your beliefs. And so it is just crystal clear what the rational thing for this, suppose for good reasons they're losing their beliefs. It's crystal clear what they should do from a rational point of view. They've lost the beliefs. They now ought to stop living, they ought to stop hanging on to Christianity. Someone who's got your views about transformative experiences, I would imagine, could look at that case and say, there's two separate issues here, right? On the one hand, they're undergoing a certain kind of loss of belief, but there's still a choice here, right? Namely, whether to embrace that or not. And furthermore, this is the interesting thing, furthermore, that choice is not rationally evaluable, right? So what everybody else says is, of course that's the choice to make. You don't have the beliefs, so quit pretending, right? From your point of view, opening yourself up to that opens that. There's major life transformation down the road. You don't know, and somehow that's to be evaluated in terms of expected utilities and so on, rather than just in terms of being an authentic person or something like that. That is what looks like an interesting consequence here, and I'm wondering if that's something that you want to say, yeah, that's right, or if you want to say, no, the standard narrative is more accurate for.
No, I like that way of thinking about things. I'm just still thinking about this and exploring it, so I don't have settled views about it. I would add that I think it's also really important. So sometimes people think, somehow, what you think matters first, and then your practices and other things kind of follow. And actually, I would want to emphasize, no. What you do is, if you want to train your mind, there are different ways you can train your mind. You can train your mind by performing one set of practices or performing a different set of practices. So you make a choice. Yeah. Do I want to, perform various kinds of religious practices that are designed to help me bring my mind into contact with God, as I understand it, right? Or I can perform sets of practices that are designed, maybe not intentionally designed, to take me away from that kind of connection.
That's sometimes described as fake it till you make it. That is to say, you engage in the practices until you form the requisite dispositions to have the beliefs that come later.
And I was thinking, sometimes I'm interested in the sensus divinitatis, where the thought is that you perform the practices, and then there's something that happens that allows you to. That's right. That allows you then to have a kind of appreciation, a capacity that you wouldn't have had before. Yeah. So the practice allows you to have a certain kind of capacity to appreciate, and then you gather that kind of evidence as opposed to another kind of evidence.
Yeah. It helps it helps me to think about what you're describing as choice related to the monitoring of our beliefs rather than thinking about in terms of what Mike was talking about in terms of following, assessing your beliefs. What you ought to do given your beliefs, rather. You're monitoring what you ought to do and how to form them.
Yeah, you're forming, you form yourself through some of your practices. You form your mental self through some of your practices. And it's a gradual process, and you can choose to a certain extent which path you take, but then the practices that you undertake will also determine that path. And I think then it's hard to see, you're not choosing the self in the distant future. You can go moment by moment by moment, and there are small choices that then take you down one path or another. I think that's a natural model.
Can I ask about, and this is changing the subject a bit, but so when you describe the nature of a transformative practice or a transformative experience, and you described it as a matter of the conundrum that you raised in the vampire case was a conundrum that arose in a way that's predicated on our desire to make a rational sort of choice. And that way of putting things assumes that our introspective sort of relationship to ourselves counts as sort of gives us some evidence we need to evaluate in order to make a rational choice.
So this is related to what Mike was asking about authenticity.
Yeah.
So I have a conception of authenticity that is, I think it's an ordinary conception. It's not a sort of standard, it's not clear whether there's a kind of traditional philosophical conception that connects with the conception that I want to push. So my philosophical conception of authenticity is partly that when we act authentically, part of what we're doing is understanding, who we are. And a way in which we understand who we are is understanding what our preferences are and what our desires are, especially when we're thinking about making choices that are going to form us in different ways. And so when I think about, well, what do I want to do to form myself in, say, do I want to open door A or do I want to open door B? Well, if I open door A, I'm going to become one kind of person. If I open door B, I'm going to become another kind of person. And the thought is, if I'm doing this in an authentic, informed way, then I can imaginatively model, well, if I undergo this experience, I'll become like that. If I undergo the other experience, the door B experience, I'll become like that. And so I can understand in an informed, authentic way, would I rather be person A or would I rather be person B? And the problem that I'm setting up is to say, well, look, someone else can tell me, well, you'll become a vampire. But I can't do that from the inside, the imaginative forward modeling of the transformation of myself. And so there's a certain way in which it's not authentic for me to decide to do that because I don't know how I'm going to respond to the experience and what I'm going to make myself into. That's the thought.
So what I'm trying to get after is how to think exactly about the evidentiary role of authenticity on your picture. So in making the choice rationally. So there's a sense in which we make a lot of different kinds of decisions about what we ought to do, say purchasing a new home or all kinds of things that in which we can consider our preferences and so on, and then try to imagine what it would be like having never done it before, and blah, blah, blah. But that those considerations end up being virtually, at least being negligible in relation to other kinds of evidence that we have on what we can find out about what the real estate market is like, what other people tell us, and externally accessible information.
Well, let me use that example. So what I'm thinking is, oh, look, the realtor is like, well, we're going to look at this house, and we're going to look at this house, we're going to look at this house. So we go to each house. It's really important. You go to the house. You walk around. You look at the rooms. Oh, I can see my sofa over here, or I could see that picture over there. Or I could see myself, happily opening the doors to the breakfast room, in the sunshine. So you imaginatively model yourself living in each of these different houses as part of an attempt to assess the value of what it would be like to live in that house. And so you can think of like what we're doing here with selves is the same way. I try to occupy the shoes of that self, and then I occupy the shoes of this self, and I occupy the shoes of this self to see what's the value of being that self versus this one versus this one. Other values matter, right? Sure, what's the mortgage interest that I'm going to have to pay or whatever. That's going to affect the expected value ultimately of the decision, how much it's going to cost me every month to live there. But my thought is that that's one part of the valuing, but this other part, mainly how great is it going to be to live in the house, is really important, and we have to be able to include that too.
I'm still thinking about the religious conversion issue.
I don't have any answers for you. I just want to say I don't.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'll do the best I can.
So there's something I really like about kind of the picture that's emerging about how this maybe works, and something I don't like about it. So here's what I like. As I mentioned before, a fairly standard kind of view about deconversion, but I actually realize a fairly standard view about conversion too, is that beliefs come first behavior follows, right? So it only makes sense to convert if you find yourself acquiring rationally the right kinds of beliefs, and then convert. It only makes sense to deconvert if you find yourself rationally losing the relevant beliefs, and then of course you deconvert. On your picture, it's more like practices lead you in, and ultimately it's going to be practices that lead you out. Maybe not in every case, but in a lot of cases, maybe in the typical case of what you might think of as an ordinary person who's not a philosopher, maybe I suspect in the case of a lot of philosophers too, you open yourself up in a certain way. You begin to participate, even if only in very small ways, in the relevant religion, or in the practice of becoming a skeptic. And as you open yourself up, it's not inevitable that the right kinds of beliefs follow along. Evidence matters, and so on and so forth.
What you take as evidence can be different in different cases.
Yeah. And so I like that story. I like it not because I want it to be true necessarily, but because it resonates with what I feel like I just observe in people. Here's what I don't like about it. I don't like it because it's puzzling. I guess I can tie it back to the vampire case. So for the vampires, it seems to make a lot of sense for them to encourage their family member to become a vampire. I mean, and even if they acknowledge that, just the choice right now to become a vampire, you can't rationally make that. It seems like it makes a lot of sense for them to say, look, just take a few steps toward opening yourself up to it. I mean, I certainly think that in the religious case. I think it makes a lot of sense for religious people. I mean, this is what evangelism's all about. For religious people to say, look, I'm having a great experience, and there's great news here, and I want, you ought to at least open yourself up to it. I mean, I even think it makes sense for skeptics to be evangelical about it and say, look, I had a bad experience there. It's much nicer over on this side, or things like that. But you seem committed to saying, I don't know what you say. I mean, is there any sense in which that makes sense? I mean, it seems like if they understand your views fully, they ought to just be like,
okay,
yeah, good luck with that.
So first, right, what I'm saying about the case of religious belief and skepticism is that I want to make room for the thought that you open yourself up and your practices will lead you to your beliefs. It could go either way, but right, I want to emphasize that this other story I think needs to be told and hasn't been sort of told as often as it should be. Now, the puzzlement that you have, I think, is legitimate and genuine. Let me, in a sense, start by adding to it. Okay. Here's another interesting structural problem. A case where I don't think there's an epistemic transformation, but where there's certainly a personal transformation. There may be an epistemic transformation. Imagine that you have 2 children, and you decide to have a third, or you have 3, you decide to have, and you have a 4th.
Or you have 4.
Or you decide to have a 5th. So in those cases, I'm going to assume that, you know what it's like to have a child. So one of my standard examples is that choosing to have your first child is actually exactly like becoming a vampire because it's epistemically and personally transformative. So you can't make it rationally if you're choosing because you think you know what it's like to have your lived experience as a parent. Okay, but in the case where, let's say you have 2 children and you're considering whether or not you want to have a third, I think it can be, here are 2 different situations that make perfect sense to me. The person with 2 children says, no, I don't want to have a third child. I'm happy how I am. Although I know that if I have that third child, I'll be quite happy to have that third child. The person with 3 who decided to have 3 children says, I'm so happy that I had that third child. Of course, I would have been, I can't imagine life without my third child, of course, because now I've been personally transformed, so who I am now is different from who I would have been if I'd only had 2 children. But I can see that I would have lived my life perfectly happily with 2 children, never having brought into existence this third child. So there's a decision theoretic issue there because it doesn't seem like there's any principled reason for someone to choose to have 2 children versus someone to choose to have 3 children. I don't know if there's a good answer there, right? That doesn't mean anything goes, but it also just means that the rational calculus isn't giving us the kind of guide that we would like to have. I suspect that something like that comes up in the cases that you described. So the vampire is like, look, it's fabulous being a vampire. Of course, anyone who wants to be a vampire, come on, just take a few steps towards becoming a vampire. Now, and I don't mean this like, we're assuming, obviously we think of vampires as being morally bad, but let's, in the example, that's not it. It's rather, this is just a very different kind of person. And they think the kind of person that they are is great and that everyone should want to be like them. And then over here, the human is like, look, I think being human is fantastic and it's really amazing. And yeah, I don't look as good as you do, but I have compassion in a way that you don't. My mortality is central to my appreciation of aesthetics and, the fragility of life and various other kinds of things. There are certain values you might have as a human that you don't have as a vampire. I want to stay human. Not clear to me there's a principled way in which we can adjudicate between those two. My inclination with respect to at least this dimension of religious belief versus skepticism is to say, well, maybe something like that is true. A lot of the ways I want to think about these things is in terms of what is the connection to tolerance, to understanding that different people have different beliefs, and there can be some reasons why someone should change their beliefs, but also understanding how people are, in a sense, encapsulated in who they are and what their preferences are. And if they can't reach out and put themselves truly in the shoes of the other, it's not clear that we should expect them to be able to do so.
Is it your view that there's no fact of the matter as to which one is preferable, or only that it's an accessibility issue in terms of our ability to choose?
I don't have a settled view, but I guess what I'm saying is it's not clear there's any principled rational answer. Right. And so there may be other things, and I'm sure there are other things that we have to say, but I think what's important is to see that there isn't a principled rational answer, that's just not the place to look. So.
Yeah, it strikes me just in the vampire case that, let's say that, you start by saying, well, let's suppose that there isn't this moral dimension to it or whatever. Well, the other way to look at it is that what if there were a moral dimension, and it's just that vampires say, no, you're looking at it all wrong. The only reason you think that this is morally bad is because you're not a vampire. If you were, you would see that it's morally correct, right?
Vampire morals think it's great to be a vampire. Yeah,
right. And then there could be that's the question. Then is it the case that there's no fact of the matter as to one of them is right, or that it's possible that one of them is right, but you have to actually occupy the position the right position in order to know.
Those may be parallel, and I'm not adjudicating that, but I think those are the kinds of questions to ask then. So the thought is just to kind of draw out the structure of the epistemic situation that we're in and understand how it fits with rational decision making, and as well as epistemic transformation and self-transformation.
Right.
So.
And when you set up your argument for the conclusion that these have to be non-rational choices, you presuppose kind of standard decision theory, and then you say standard decision theory can't accommodate this. So at least in principle, it looks like someone could just say, well, and that's just the trouble with standard decision theory. In the face of that response, do you say, well, no, but the problem is deeper because there's actually no decision theory. It's not that we can just chuck standard decision theory in favor of a nearby variant. There's no decision theory that can handle these cases, or do you just say, yeah, right, the problem is standard decision theory, and that's the end?
So first, I'm actually a big fan of expected utility and decision theory. I think that ideal rational agents should, in fact, calculate so as to maximize their expected utility and choose along those lines. So I want decision theory to be able to kind of help us here. So it is true that I don't think just making minor tweaks are going to help, and that's the 2-child, 3-child case. I think there's something deeper going on, namely with the way that we as agents are sort of contained within temporal moments and how we basically don't have epistemic access to future and arguably even dramatically different past selves, and that fact might mean that we have to think about our epistemic models in a different way. But there's something else, which is that I think that there's also this tension between making decisions rationally and making decisions authentically. And so that the really interesting question isn't let's just throw away decision theory. Rather, it's thinking about how we really want to be able to form our future selves in a way that's enlightened and informed and involves a kind of notion of self-realization. Authentic self-realization is really the kind of modern picture, and especially people in Western societies think of themselves as having a lot of choice and a lot of control. And I think this brings in new kinds of problems with respect to what we can and can't know and how we're supposed to make rational decisions if we also value this kind of informed, authentic, imaginative self-formation.